Imagine waking up one day and realizing that the world has moved ahead, but you haven't. Everyone around you is learning, evolving, growing, and you stayed still. That feeling of being left behind isn't fear, it's truth. But here's the thing, you can change it. Starting today, you can educate yourself every single day and nothing can stop your rise. The first key point is that knowledge is your most unstealable asset. Think about it for a moment. Your house can burn down, your car can be stolen, your bank account can be emptied, but no one can take what you have learned, what you understand, or the insights you carry in your mind. It's like planting a seed in soil no one else can reach. Every fact you absorb, every idea you wrestle with, every new skill you practice, these become a part of you in a way that nothing else in the world can. I remember a friend of mine who grew up in a small town with almost no resources. She didn't have money for fancy schools, but she read every book she could get her hands on, watched lectures online, and spent hours talking to people who knew more than her. 20 years later, she built a career and a life that would have seemed impossible to anyone around her back then. The tools that enabled her success weren't money, connections, or luck. They were the knowledge she refused to let go of. Every lesson you take in is a brick in the foundation of your freedom. It's not flashy and it doesn't always give instant results, but over time, it becomes the only kind of wealth that never fades. Imagine a man stranded in a remote village during a storm, with no supplies, no help, and no shelter. What would keep him alive? His skills, his knowledge of the land, and his understanding of nature. That's the power of education. Even if life strips away everything else, comfort, possessions, recognition, it cannot strip away what you know and can do. I've met people who've lost everything in a single week, yet the moment they open a book or solve a problem, they feel rich again. It's a quiet, unshakable wealth that doesn't depend on markets or luck. Knowledge also acts like a shield against fear. Fear often comes from not knowing, from the uncertainty of what might happen, from imagining the worst. But when you educate yourself, even just a little every day, you arm yourself with understanding. You start to see patterns in the chaos, to recognize opportunities hidden behind challenges, to separate reality from the stories your mind creates. I remember a colleague who faced sudden job loss. He was terrified at first, but because he had spent years learning about digital marketing in his spare time, he didn't panic for long. He simply applied what he knew, found a niche, and turned a setback into a brand new career path. Knowledge didn't just help him survive, it gave him confidence to move forward when everything else felt uncertain. But knowledge is not just a defense, it's also a compass. It shows you possibilities you couldn't see before. I think of a man I once met traveling through the mountains, a humble carpenter who taught himself astronomy from old books and star charts. Every night he would study the sky and chart constellations, dreaming of distant planets. He couldn't travel beyond his village, but he discovered worlds in his mind, and those discoveries transformed the way he lived. He approached every day with curiosity, with purpose, and with a sense of possibility that wealth alone could never give. That is what knowledge does. It expands the borders of your mind, letting you explore even when your body is confined. Learning also creates an invisible ripple effect. Each new thing you understand changes the way you interact with the world and the people around you. A young teacher I knew struggled to connect with her students at first, until she spent months learning about human psychology and effective communication. Once she applied even small insights, her classroom transformed. Kids who were disengaged began participating, and parents noticed the change too. Her knowledge didn't just serve her, it became a gift that touched many others. Every fact you learn, every skill you practice, eventually radiates beyond yourself. It's a quiet, unstoppable influence that can reshape relationships, communities, even entire industries. There is also a subtle personal empowerment that comes from owning knowledge. It teaches you that you don't have to rely on others to tell you your worth or to validate your ideas. I met a young woman who grew up in a family that constantly doubted her abilities. She wasn't allowed to pursue the arts she loved, but she taught herself painting, music, and design. She kept a journal of everything she learned. Over time, she became not only skilled but fearless, because she had a private world of mastery no one could take from her. That sense of self-sufficiency, of inner resourcefulness, is the true power of daily education. Finally, knowledge gives you the freedom to make choices. It allows you to see paths that others cannot, to take risks that others fear, to create opportunities that seem invisible. I think of a man who left a stable but uninspiring job because he had spent years learning about renewable energy in his spare time. When a new opportunity arose in his field, he was ready, while everyone else hesitated. Knowledge had given him clarity, courage, and vision. It didn't just prepare him for one opportunity, it prepared him for life. Every day you choose to learn, to question, to understand, you are investing in the most unshakable part of yourself, a part that no circumstance can ever steal. The second key point is that curiosity is your superpower. Imagine your mind as a vast, unexplored forest, dense with shadows and hidden streams. Most people walk along the same worn paths every day, stepping over the same roots, never noticing the secrets that hide under every leaf. But curiosity, real curiosity, is like a lantern you carry into that forest. It illuminates corners others never see. It reveals possibilities others ignore. I once met a young man who spent his evenings dismantling old radios just to see how the wires connected, how the energy flowed. His friends laughed at him, saying it was a waste of time. Years later, he became an engineer whose inventions powered homes in remote villages. Curiosity had been his compass all along, pointing him to what mattered before anyone else could even imagine it. Curiosity transforms ordinary moments into extraordinary lessons. When you notice the way a barista steams milk just right, or the way your neighbor solves a problem you've always avoided, you are learning. Every observation becomes a piece of a puzzle, a new lens through which you can understand the world. I knew a woman who traveled the same subway route for years, always lost in her phone. One day she started paying attention, the patterns of commuters, the rhythm of the trains, the conversations that floated through the cars. She noticed subtle differences that gave her ideas for a storytelling project that later became her first published book. The world constantly speaks, but most of us have headphones in. Curiosity is what makes you hear it. It also challenges the illusions you carry about yourself and the world. People often settle into comfortable assumptions, believing they know what they're capable of or what the world will allow. Curiosity is the gentle rebellion against that resignation. I remember a friend who had convinced herself she couldn't learn to code because she had failed math in school. One afternoon, out of sheer curiosity, she opened a tutorial and started experimenting. Within a few months, she was creating apps that solved real problems for her community. Curiosity didn't just teach her coding, it shattered the invisible cage she had built around herself. Curiosity is contagious, and it creates a life of endless doors opening. I met a man who, as a teenager, was obsessed with the night sky. He would spend hours mapping stars, asking questions that even his teachers couldn't answer. That curiosity didn't just lead him to astronomy. It drew him into physics, then engineering, then renewable energy. Every question became a stepping stone, each answer revealing another door. He didn't just learn facts, he built a career fueled by his fascination. That is the power of curiosity. It multiplies itself, expanding into fields and experiences you never planned for. It also teaches resilience in the face of failure. When you are truly curious, failure stops being a punishment and becomes a clue. I recall a young chef who tried to perfect a recipe for weeks only to burn every attempt. Instead of giving up, she dissected each mistake, asked herself why, and experimented with new ingredients. Eventually, she created a dish that became a signature in her restaurant. Curiosity turns setbacks into laboratories of insight. It keeps you moving when fear would have frozen you. It keeps you asking questions when certainty would have stopped you. And it keeps you alive in the pursuit of your best work. Curiosity connects you to people in unexpected ways. I once met a traveler who would approach strangers simply to ask about their lives, their work, their dreams. Most people guard themselves, but a curious mind opens doors, invites stories, and learns lessons that no book could provide. He returned home not only with souvenirs, but with insights that shaped a non-profit supporting artisans around the world. Curiosity transforms ordinary encounters into catalysts for growth, showing you that every human being is a walking library waiting to teach you something new. Finally, curiosity gives life its sense of wonder. We can get trapped in routines, measuring days by tasks completed rather than questions asked. I knew a man who worked at a factory for decades, convinced his life was ordinary. One evening, he noticed a spider weaving its web in the corner of the ceiling. Instead of ignoring it, he studied it, sketched it, and began learning about biology in his spare time. That small act of curiosity transformed his ings into a world of discovery and eventually led him to teach children about nature in his town. Curiosity turns monotony into adventure, showing that even in the smallest moments, the world is full of lessons, waiting for the mind brave enough to ask. The third key point is that you must learn from the world, not just the classroom. Most of us are taught to believe that education happens within walls, under fluorescent lights, with notebooks and tests, but life itself is the most brilliant, relentless teacher. I once met a man who had dropped out of school at 15. Everyone told him he was lost, that his options were limited, yet he spent years observing the way his community functioned, how neighbors negotiated, how trades were conducted, how crises were solved. By the time he was 25, he had a small business thriving, built entirely from insights he had gathered outside textbooks. Life was his classroom, and curiosity was his syllabus. Every day holds lessons if we are willing to notice. There was a young woman who worked as a waitress in a busy diner, a job she thought was just temporary. But she paid attention, the way her co-workers handled stress, how customers responded to kindness, how timing and patience could turn chaos into order. She began experimenting with small improvements, better systems for orders, subtle changes in how people were greeted. Within a year, the diner was thriving and she was promoted to manager. She had learned more about leadership in those months than she ever had in any school. The world speaks in patterns and details, and those who learn to listen are the ones who succeed quietly but powerfully. Failures are often the sharps. Teachers. A man I knew had a small construction business that collapsed overnight because he trusted the wrong partner. Many would have given up. But he reflected, studied what went wrong, asked questions from contractors, suppliers, and even competitors. Each painful interaction became a lesson in judgment, risk, and strategy. 5 years later, his second venture not only succeeded but grew to serve clients across the state. The world teaches through experience, and the cost of not paying attention is often high, but the cost of learning is priceless. Observation alone is not enough, reflection is essential. I remember a young artist who spent hours walking through her city, sketching buildings, watching people, and noticing the small details most ignored. She didn't just copy what she saw, she thought about why things were the way they were, the light at a certain hour, the emotion on someone's face, the symmetry or imperfection in everyday objects. These reflections shaped her paintings into something unique, something that spoke to the soul of her audience. Learning from the world requires slowing down enough to understand, not just to see. Even ordinary people are extraordinary teachers if we pay attention. I once met a bus driver who could navigate the city with perfect timing, predicting traffic and human behavior with uncanny precision. Out of curiosity, a young engineer began shadowing him, asking questions about route choices, how he managed stress, and why certain patterns repeated daily. Those lessons later inspired a transportation app that reduced commuting time for thousands of people. Education doesn't always come from the famous or the obvious. Sometimes it's hidden in the quiet competence of those around you, waiting for someone to notice. Experience teaches empathy in a way books cannot. There was a young volunteer who traveled to remote villages helping with basic healthcare. Each day brought challenges she had never imagined: illness, fear, poverty, miscommunication. She learned not just about medicine, but about patience, humility, and the human spirit. Her classroom had no desks, yet she graduated into wisdom that no degree could offer. The world's lessons are not abstract, they are living, breathing, messy, and profoundly human. To learn from them, you must be willing to step outside comfort and expectation. Finally, learning from the world requires action. Knowledge observed but not applied is like a river blocked by a dam. It loses its purpose. I met a man who spent years studying environmental science, but it was only when he planted a small garden in his neighborhood, teaching kids and neighbors about sustainable practices, that his understanding truly took root. His ideas grew into a community project that transformed the block. The world gives lessons generously, but only to those who engage, experiment, and bring insight into reality. Learning from life is active, immersive, and endlessly rewarding if we choose to see beyond the pages of a book. The fourth key point is that small daily learning compounds into massive advantage. Most people underestimate the power of tiny, consistent steps because they are distracted by the allure of dramatic results. But life rarely rewards leaps, it rewards steady accumulation. I knew a man who committed to reading just 10 pages every night before bed. 10 pages. It seemed insignificant at first, almost laughable to his friends. Yet 20 years later, those small pages had transformed him into a well-read thinker, a writer whose words influenced thousands. The small actions he repeated every day quietly shaped the trajectory of his entire life, creating momentum that no single grand effort could have achieved. Consistency turns ordinary effort into exponential growth. I once met a young woman learning piano. She could barely play a simple melody on day one. She practiced 15 minutes every morning without fail. After a year, she played pieces that amazed her friends and family. It wasn't about talent alone, it was the rhythm of repetition, the slow layering of skill. Knowledge works the same way. Each day you add a little, even when it feels meaningless, and over time it compounds into mastery. What seems tiny now becomes the foundation for greatness tomorrow. The quiet power of small daily learning often goes unnoticed until it's undeniable. There was a boy who loved sketching, but only ever drew for a few minutes each day, while others mocked him for not creating masterpieces immediately. Years later, he became an illustrator for major publications, his unique style a product of thousands of small sketches, experiments, and corrections. Each small effort repeated had built a skill that no crash course could replicate. Life has a way of rewarding persistence that others mistake for mediocrity, but the results when they appear are unstoppable. Small learning also shields you from sudden challenges. I remember a woman who had been quietly studying first aid, nutrition, and basic emergency care for years, only a few minutes at a time during her lunch breaks. One day, her neighbor collapsed from a heart attack. Without thinking, she acted calmly, applying the techniques she had learned. That small daily preparation turned into a life-saving moment. The compound effect of daily learning is not just skill, it is readiness, resilience, and the quiet confidence to face whatever life throws at you. Daily learning trains your mind in patience and long-term thinking. We live in a culture obsessed with instant gratification, where every reward is expected to appear immediately. But someone who commits to small daily growth understands a different rhythm. I once knew a gardener who planted a single tree each year, slowly cultivating a forest on barren land. Neighbors laughed at how little progress was visible. Decades later, the forest stood tall, providing shade, fruit, and beauty. Knowledge compounds like that forest, quietly building its strength day by day, eventually transforming barren potential into flourishing reality. Even failures become fertile soil when learning is consistent. A young entrepreneur I met started a small online business that failed repeatedly. Each failure, instead of crushing him, became a small lesson he added to his growing collection of insights. He learned marketing, customer psychology, negotiation, and resilience. Tiny fragments accumulated over years. Eventually, he launched a business that succeeded far beyond his early expectations. The power of compounding isn't just in victories, it's in turning each setback into a brick for the bridge to your future. Finally, the beauty of small daily learning is that it is accessible to everyone. You don't need wealth, fame, or extraordinary circumstances. A single idea read in a newspaper, a 5-minute reflection, or a brief conversation can start a chain reaction. I knew a janitor who loved history and decided to read one paragraph every night. Decades later, he could discuss world events with clarity and insight that impressed scholars twice his age. Every day matters. Every tiny piece of knowledge matters. The compound effect waits silently, and those who feed it consistently find themselves years later standing far ahead of anyone who chased instant success. The fifth key point is that failures are lessons dressed as pain. Most of us run from failure, pretending it doesn't exist, hoping life will let us pass without encountering it. But failure is not the enemy. It is the sculptor quietly shaping your character, trimming what is weak, revealing what is strong. I once knew a man who invested everything in a small bakery, only for it to collapse within 6 months because of a supplier mistake. He was devastated, but instead of hiding from the experience, he studied every error, timing, budgeting, customer behavior, even the way he had communicated with his staff. That painful collapse became a detailed blueprint for success, one he would later use to build a thriving restaurant that others called impossible. Pain teaches clarity in a way comfort never can. When life goes smoothly, our vision is often clouded by distraction, ego, and routine. But when you fail, when you lose, when your plans collapse, the fog lifts. You start noticing details you ignored before, the choices that led to the outcome, the habits that strengthened or weakened you, the assumptions you had carried blindly. I remember a young athlete who missed a championship by a fraction of a second. The disappointment could have crushed her, but she chose to analyze every training session, every sleep pattern, every meal, and every thought leading up to that moment. The next season, she won. Not because she trained harder, but because she trained smarter, guided by the lessons hidden in failure. Failure also strips away illusions about what is essential. A woman I knew spent years climbing a corporate ladder, chasing titles, bonuses, and recognition, believing these were the markers of success. When she was suddenly laid off, she realized she had ignored her true passions, mentoring others and creating meaningful work. The shock of failure forced her to confront what really mattered, and she went on to build a nonprofit that touched hundreds of lives. Pain has a brutal honesty that no mentor, no lecture, no book can replicate. It shows you what is real, what is superficial, and what you are capable of. Failure humbles us, but it also empowers. I met a man who had been a top salesperson in his company, until one mistake caused him to lose a major client. The embarrassment was overwhelming, but instead of retreating, he approached the loss as a puzzle. He studied why the client left, the missteps he had made, and the behaviors he could improve. That humbling experience reshaped his approach to business and relationships. Within a year, he became a leader who didn't just sell, but inspired loyalty and trust, turning each new deal into a long-term relationship. Failure, when examined, becomes a teacher more patient than any instructor. Sometimes failure teaches patience. A young writer I knew sent her man a script to dozens of publishers and received rejection after rejection. Each no stung, but she continued writing, refining, and learning. Years later, a small press accepted her book, and it became a cult classic, admired not only for its story but for the depth that only years of struggle could create. Rejection was her lesson in endurance, showing her that the journey mattered as much as the destination, and that wisdom often grows slowly through repeated attempts. Failure also teaches perspective, showing us that our imagined catastrophes are rarely permanent. I remember a man who lost his house in a sudden flood. At first, despair consumed him. But as he rebuilt, he realized how much he had taken for granted: the strength of his body, the loyalty of his friends, the resilience he never recognized in himself. The loss, though painful, taught him gratitude and adaptability in a way that comfort never could. Pain gives depth to life, showing us the fragility of circumstance and the invincibility of the human spirit. Finally, failure teaches creativity. A young entrepreneur I met had a tech startup fail spectacularly. Instead of giving up, he experimented with unconventional solutions, pivoted into new markets, and invented processes that none of his competitors had imagined. The failure was not an endpoint. It was a laboratory, a space that demanded ingenuity and problem solving. Every mistake, every setback, every misstep became raw material for innovation. Pain, when approached with curiosity and courage, is not the opposite of success. It is the secret pathway to it. The sixth key point is that you must surround yourself with minds that challenge you. Too often we settle into circles that comfort us, echoing our own beliefs and reassuring us that our limitations are normal. I knew a young man who spent years with friends, who discouraged risk, who mocked ambition, who laughed at curiosity. He thought he was safe in their company, but in reality, he was shrinking. It wasn't until he met a mentor who questioned everything he believed about himself that he began to grow. The first uncomfortable conversation felt like a shock to his system, but slowly, it cracked open a space inside him that had been closed for years. Growth, real growth, often begins with discomfort, and discomfort comes from being challenged. Challenging minds make you rethink assumptions you didn't even know you had. I remember a woman who had always believed she wasn't creative, that her ideas were ordinary and unremarkable. Then she met a group of colleagues who pushed her to experiment, to fail, and to speak her mind. They asked questions that were sharp, uncomfortable, and relentless. At first, she resisted, clinging to her old narratives. But each question, each debate, peeled away layers of self-doubt until she discovered a well of creativity she never imagined. The people you choose to spend time with can either reinforce the walls around you or help you tear them down. Being around sharp minds forces you to raise your standards. A young athlete I knew trained alone for years, content with small victories. One day he joined a team where every member pushed harder, ran faster, thought smarter. The first practices were humbling. He felt inadequate, exhausted, even embarrassed. But over time, those challenges transformed him. His performance soared because the people around him demanded more, not from malice, but from belief in their potential and his. In life, if you want to rise, you must live in the company of those who expect more than the minimum from themselves and from you. Challenging minds also teach humility and curiosity. I once met an engineer who was considered brilliant in his field, until he attended a conference where every conversation made him realize how much he didn't know. Instead of retreating into pride, he embraced curiosity, asking questions, listening intently, learning from everyone around him. The discomfort of being confronted by superior knowledge became a catalyst for mastery. Surrounding yourself with people who know more, think differently, or see farther is not a threat, it's an invitation to evolve. These minds push you to act when most would hesitate. I knew a writer who spent years drafting alone, afraid of criticism. When she joined a workshop full of demanding peers, she was forced to submit her work, to defend it, to learn from feedback that stung but illuminated. The pressure of expectation, The constant questioning of her choices transformed her practice. Action and growth are inseparable, and they often require someone to challenge you into stepping forward. No one grows in isolation. Being challenged also teaches resilience. Life will test you, that is certain. But if you spend your days with people who challenge, question, and hold you accountable, those small daily exercises in resilience prepare you for storms you cannot predict. I met a young entrepreneur whose first business failed. The lessons he had learned from friends who constantly questioned his decisions allowed him to rebuild smarter, faster, and stronger. The resilience he developed wasn't theoretical. It was forged in real dialogue, in real challenge, over years of uncomfortable but transformative interactions. Finally, challenging minds expand your vision. I once traveled with a man who constantly asked, "Why do we accept this? What if it could be different?" He questioned every assumption, every process, every tradition, not for rebellion, but for possibility. Being around him made me see the world differently, not just in what could be done, but in what could be imagined. Surround yourself with minds that refuse to accept mediocrity, that probe, that question, that demand more of you and of themselves. They don't just educate you, they elevate you, showing you heights you might never have dared to climb alone. The seventh key point is that action transforms education into power. You can read every book on leadership, memorize every fact about science, or understand every principle of success. But if nothing moves from your mind into your hands, it is like holding water in a cup with a hole. It slips away before it can nourish anything. I remember a young man who spent years learning everything about digital marketing, crafting strategies, analyzing trends, and absorbing insights. Yet he never launched a single campaign, too afraid of making mistakes. One day, on a whim, he posted a simple article online and it went viral. That single act of doing what he had been studying quietly for years changed his career overnight. Knowledge becomes real only when it is tested, applied, and lived. Action turns theory into experience. A woman I knew had read countless books on public speaking, memorized techniques, and visualized herself delivering flawless presentations. But she would never speak in front of a crowd, trapped in the fear of imperfection. Then she volunteered to lead a small community workshop, trembling with every word. By the end, she realized that speaking, interacting, adjusting in real time was the teacher she had been missing. Every lesson she had read about came alive the moment she acted. The moment you step into practice, your understanding deepens in ways reading alone can never achieve. Action also tests your courage. I once met a man who had dreamed of traveling the world but had been stuck in a routine job for years. He had researched destinations, saved tips, and planned meticulously, yet nothing happened because the journey remained a plan, not a reality. One morning he bought a ticket with no itinerary and left. The fear he felt stepping into the unknown was immense. But every challenge he faced, missed buses, language barriers, unfamiliar cultures, taught him resilience, resourcefulness, and confidence. Knowledge about the world is only as powerful as the experiences you allow yourself to have in it. Applying what you learn creates momentum. A young entrepreneur spent months studying finance, observing markets, and crafting business plans. Every day without action felt like treading water, frustrating and invisible. But the moment he opened his doors, started selling, and engaged with customers, each small action amplified the value of everything he had learned. The decisions he made in the real world fed back into his knowledge, sharpening it, refining it, making it alive. Action turns passive understanding into dynamic growth, a cycle that compounds in ways waiting, planning, or theorizing never can. Action reveals gaps you cannot see from study alone. I met a writer who had perfected grammar, memorized narrative structures, and analyzed countless novels, but her own stories fell flat. Only when she submitted her first short story to a magazine and received brutal feedback Did she understand the disconnect between theory and practice? Every critique became a stepping stone, a precise map for improvement. Without action, knowledge remains abstract. It is through doing that you discover what you truly know and what you still need to learn. Action transforms fear into confidence. I recall a teacher who had spent years studying classroom management and educational psychology, but had never actually led a class alone. On the first day, her anxiety was paralyzing. But by stepping in and facing the chaos of real students, she learned, adapted, and discovered her own methods that worked far better than any theory. Every action she took built confidence layer by layer. Knowledge without application may comfort the mind, but courage and mastery emerge only when you move from preparation to engagement. Finally, action creates impact. A young volunteer had learned about social issues for years, reading statistics, absorbing stories, and attending seminars. Yet she felt powerless because learning alone didn't change the world. One day, she organized a small community project, bringing people together to clean a park. The difference was immediate and tangible. People smiled, neighbors connected, and her ideas became reality. Action bridges the gap between potential and influence, transforming knowledge into something visible, useful, and unforgettable. Education gives you power, but action delivers it. And as you sit with all of this, let it settle quietly within you, like sunlight shifting across a room. Every day you choose to learn, to notice, to question, to act, you are shaping a life that no circumstance can take from you. Knowledge, curiosity, action, consistency, resilience, the company you keep, and the courage to apply what you know, they are not separate steps or goals to chase, they are the steady rhythm of a mind that refuses to remain small. You may not feel it immediately. Growth rarely arrives all at once. It accumulates in the small, unseen moments. Reading a paragraph, asking a question, learning from a mistake, listening when you would rather speak. Those tiny deposits, repeated patiently, slowly transform the way you see yourself, the world, and what is possible. It is in this quiet accumulation that power quietly builds. Life will continue to test you, and often in ways that feel unfair or overwhelming. But if you hold on to the principles you've explored, you will meet each challenge with clarity instead of confusion, patience instead of frustration, and confidence instead of fear. The strength you seek has already begun forming quietly within you, and you will find over time that the lessons of every experience, whether a small success or a sharp failure, become tools you carry forward. They give you a perspective others might never see, a steadiness in moments of uncertainty, and a sense of self that is grounded, unshakable, and deeply yours. This is the way life rewards those who commit to learning not just for a moment, but as a way of being. Every day, you have the chance to expand a little more, to see a little further, to become a little wiser. The sum of these choices, these small, deliberate efforts, quietly compounds into a life that feels intentional, capable, and whole. And in the stillness of reflection, when you look back on who you were versus who you are becoming, you will see that the work of growth is not flashy, but it is steady, enduring, and profound. Every day you educate yourself, you reclaim a part of your future, and with each step forward, that future becomes more fully yours. So carry this with you as you move into the world again, not as a burden, but as a quiet companion. The mind that seeks, that questions, that acts, is never powerless. It is alive, awake, and quietly unstoppable. And in that quiet, you will find the clarity, the strength, and the resilience to navigate whatever comes next.